The body was badly damaged, so for sanitary reasons, we've already held the burial. The moment the word sanitary reached my ears, a wave of terror and despair welled up from the depths of my soul. It was Louis, Katie's husband, who informed me that my daughter, Katie, had passed away. Just yesterday, she had smiled at me. "I'll see you soon," she said. "But now," Louis coldly said, "I'm quite busy, so I'll have to go." Before hanging up the phone, I was left in a daze. I tried calling him back several times to ask about the funeral, but eventually, I was blocked. A chilling fear and overwhelming despair swirled within me. The sense of loss, the feeling of being utterly alone in the world, slowly ate away at my heart. And so, 3 years passed. No matter how much time went by, fragments of Katie remained lodged in my heart. Her presence never left my mind, no matter how much time passed. That day, as I was on my way home from work, as usual, I found myself thinking of Katie without even realizing it. If she were alive, what kind of life would she be living right now? As I was lost in these thoughts, I suddenly noticed someone standing in front of the entrance to my home. A woman, whom I didn't recognize, was just standing there. Her back was slender, and her long hair swayed in the wind. My heart jumped, and I was stunned. At that moment, the woman turned around, and it seemed she had noticed me. "What? No way," I muttered without thinking. "I'm home," she said. The person standing there was Katie, who I had been told died 3 years ago. She looked exactly the same as she had on that day, as if time had stopped, as beautiful as ever. I was overwhelmed with confusion and shock, unable to say a word. "Mom, I'm sorry I'm late," Katie said, tears welling up in her eyes, her voice trembling. "My name is Haley." As I gazed at the sunset outside my window, I found myself immersed in memories. Memories of when I had just given birth to my daughter, Katie. Since the day I lost my husband, Jameson, Katie's father, in an accident, my life had never been the same. A deep scar had been carved into my heart, and I realized just how much his presence had meant to me. His smile, his kindness, how much they had supported me. Every day, I felt the weight of losing him. Time may heal wounds, but this loneliness, this emptiness, remains lodged in my chest like a heavy stone. Years have passed since then, but his smile, his voice, they're still as vivid in my mind as if it all happened yesterday. Remembering them should bring me joy, but instead, it fills me with sorrow. The joy I felt when Katie was born, and the loneliness that followed still battle within my heart. Even now, after my husband's death, I made up my mind to raise Katie on my own. I worked tirelessly for Katie's sake and to carry on his memory. All my efforts were focused on living the irreplaceable moments of the present with my beloved Katie. I have to keep going. Keep going. At some point, this word became my catchphrase. Not that I said it to anyone in particular, but to motivate myself, I'd whisper, "Must keep going. I can do it." Thanks to my hard work, Katie studied diligently and got into a good university. She made it through both her studies and social life without any major issues, graduating successfully. After graduation, she started living with her boyfriend Louis, and I began living alone in my apartment. At first, I felt a bit lonely, but Katie would come check in on me from time to time, and we talked frequently on the phone, so I wasn't really lonely at all. However, each time I realized Katie no longer needed me to take care of her, I felt the tension in my shoulders release, and a small sense of emptiness crept in. No more need to keep pushing myself. Yet, for some reason, that thought made me feel lonely. "Mom, I'm bringing Louis over this weekend." One day, she told me that out of the blue over the phone. It was the moment I'd been waiting for. Katie introducing her boyfriend to me meant that she was ready to take the next step in her life. This was it truly. I didn't have to keep pushing myself anymore. With mixed feelings of excitement and a hint of sadness, I awaited the weekend. As I prepared for Katie and Louis' visit, A mixture of anxiety and anticipation swirled within me. When the doorbell rang, my heart raced. I hurried to open the door. Standing there was Katie's familiar smile, along with Louis, whom I was meeting for the first time. He was tall and looked like a kind young man, with a gentle smile. As I felt a bit of relief at his appearance, I also tried to sense what might be hiding behind his eyes. "Hello, I'm Louis. Thank you for always taking care of Katie." Louis's calm voice put me at ease. He smiled, showing his neatly aligned, clean teeth, and squinted slightly as he looked at me. "I'm Haley. Thank you for coming today." I couldn't help but return his smile. After finishing the meal preparations, the three of us sat around the table. Katie listened to Louis's stories with a delighted expression, and my heart warmed as I watched them. Seeing Katie so happy made me happier than anything else. Louis, too, watched over Katie with kindness, matching his mood to her smile. Having started living with my husband after getting married, I had no experience with cohabitation before marriage, so I couldn't imagine what challenges and struggles the two of them might face. But as long as they were living happily together, I thought that was a wonderful thing. After the meal, I told Katie, "Take your time and relax," and started washing the dishes. The two of them spoke in voices too soft for me to hear. Seeing Louis gaze at Katie with such tenderness gave me a sense of relief. However, I couldn't stop noticing the faint dark circles under her eyes, and the thought stayed in my mind. Katie, is she overworked? That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't help but think about Katie. I was happy that she was preparing to take the next steps in her life, but I couldn't shake the underlying anxiety in my heart. "Katie, I hope you'll be happy. I'm probably being overprotective, but overprotective or not, she is the most important person in the world to me." I closed my eyes, silently praying, and slowly drifted off to sleep. In my dreams, joyful memories flashed before me one after another, eventually fading away. When I woke, the stillness around me felt oddly lonely. A few months later, I received an unexpected call from Katie. Hearing her voice made me feel like I was continuing a dream. "I want to introduce Louis to you. Not as my boyfriend this time, but as my fiancé." Though she spoke over the phone, I could hear the happiness in her voice. I felt a mix of surprise and excitement, eagerly looking forward to their visit. On the day of their second visit, Louis showed up wearing a suit. From the very first time we met, I had a good impression of him. He stood tall, radiating both politeness and kindness. From what she had told me, Louis came from a prominent family in the local community. Raised in a wealthy household, his demeanor was gentle, and he treated Katie with great respect and care. "I'd like to welcome Katie into my family," Louis said. For a moment, tension flickered in my heart. There was something heavy about the way he phrased it. I couldn't help but probe further, trying to understand the meaning behind his words. "What do you mean by your family?" I asked. Louis's expression grew serious as he looked directly at me. "My family has been known as community leaders for generations. As the eldest son, there's an expectation that I must take a wife, and this belief is deeply ingrained in our family. To meet their expectations, I want to ask Katie to take on that role." His words sounded almost like a formal speech. The first thing that crossed my mind was, do people refer to themselves as community leaders? And what does it even mean to be a leader of the community? Though many questions arose, I decided to accept that families of certain stature had their own ways of thinking. Katie would take his family name, and from the way the conversation was going, it sounded like they would be living together with his family. After a brief moment of consideration, I agreed. It was only natural to put Katie's happiness first and respect her choices. But when I saw the clouded look on Katie's face, I grew concerned. "Katie, are you okay?" "Yeah, I'm okay," she replied, though her answer wasn't very convincing. That night, Katie asked if she could stay over at my apartment, something she hadn't done in a long time. It was 10 p.m. Normally, I'd be in bed by then, but Katie pulled out a small bottle of whiskey from her bag. Will you have a drink with me? She smiled. We sat together in the corner of the kitchen, relying on the soft, dim lighting. We filled large glasses, not quite suited for whiskey, with plenty of ice, and drank it slowly, undiluted. Neither of us really liked alcohol that much. She seemed like she was forcing herself to drink the whiskey. I couldn't help but notice that the dark circles under her eyes had deepened since the last time I saw her. If there's something you're worried about, don't hesitate to tell me, I said. I'm fine. I'm just probably a little nervous about the upcoming wedding, she replied, with a slightly sad expression. I chose not to press further. It's her first wedding after all, so it's natural she would feel anxious. Things won't be the same as just continuing their cohabitation. Katie will be living at his family's house. I couldn't quite picture it, but I imagined something like those strict mother-in-law scenarios you see in movies or dramas, where she wakes up early to make breakfast. Then I shook my head. That's outdated thinking. There's no way families like that still exist today. I'm hungry, she murmured, so I made her a cup of instant noodles, her favorite one. When she was little, we used to split the noodles and toppings in half to share them. Seeing her now, able to finish an entire cup on her own, made me feel just a little lonely. We ate cup noodles and drank the strong whiskey, chatting late into the night. I wondered if one day we would look back on nights like this and feel nostalgic. Katie left the next morning, but she called me a few times after that. She talked about how busy she was with wedding preparations, how hard she was working on cooking and laundry, all small, mundane things, but hearing her voice always put me at ease. A few weeks after Louis was introduced as her fiancé, we won't be having a family meeting, she told me. I had been nervous, thinking that such a prestigious family would naturally hold a formal meeting, so I felt a little deflated. There was a time when I wondered if we weren't having one because I was a single mother. Maybe I was being a bit self-conscious. In the end, even as the wedding day approached, I never got the chance to meet Louis's parents. It seemed the first time we would exchange greetings would be at the wedding itself, and I was anxious. The day before the wedding, Katie came to my house. Smiling, she said, I want to spend my last night as a single woman with you. I was surprised, but seeing her face brought me relief. Spending a quiet night together in my small apartment didn't sound so bad. Mom, what's married life like? She asked. Well, it's different for every couple, so it's hard to say, I answered. For me, having lost my husband so early on, the memories of what married life was like were now distant. The busy days of raising her blurred the time I spent with my husband, leaving those memories somewhat idealized. From tomorrow, a new chapter in Katie's life will begin. I'm sure Dad is watching from heaven, wishing for her happiness. Yay, I hope so. Katie lost her dad when she was very young, so she probably doesn't remember much about him. Even so, there's something I want to tell her. Your dad always had such a happy look on his face whenever he saw you as a little girl. We lost track of time as we talked about all sorts of things. I shared the joys and challenges of married life, memories of my husband, hoping to encourage Katie as she imagined her own happy future. When the melody from the clock on the wall started to play, we both fell silent, our eyes drifting away. Katie then said, I think I should get going. So I decided to walk her to the door. It feels like time just flew by. It's kind of lonely, isn't it? Don't worry, Mom. Even after I'm married, I'll come visit you all the time. Her words and that slightly tired smile of hers tugged at my heart. After seeing Katie off, I kept replaying her words. I'll come visit you all the time, over and over in my mind, praying for her happiness. Yet, deep down, I felt something unsettling. Maybe it's just a mother's intuition, but Katie's occasional, fleeting sad expressions didn't seem to be just pre-wedding jitters. Is she really okay? That night, I thought about Katie for a long time. What must be going on in her heart as her wedding day approached us? These thoughts stayed with me as I drifted off to sleep. The next morning, I woke up early and took a shower. I did my hair and put on my makeup. I had already booked a taxi a few days ago, and it would come to pick me up right on time. Taking a taxi felt like a bit of a luxury, but Katie and Louie had arranged everything for me. They even prepared my dress at the venue, so I wasn't planning to bring anything with me. As I was getting ready, my smartphone rang. It was a call from Louie. The bride and groom should already be at the venue getting ready. So what could this be about? Worried, I answered the call. "Good morning, Louie. Is everything all right?" I tried to respond cheerfully, thinking he might just be feeling nervous before the big day. But Louie's voice was unusually heavy. "Haley, I'm sorry. Something terrible has happened." My heart started to race. At that moment, I was filled with dread, terrified of what he might say next. Katie was in an accident last night. She passed away. I couldn't immediately grasp what Louie was saying. It felt as if time had frozen, and I was left speechless. Louie continued speaking. "It was at a crosswalk, on her way home. She was hit by a car. The damage to her body was severe, and due to sanitary concerns, we've already laid her to rest." As soon as the word sanitary hit my ears, a deep terror and despair welled up inside me. Katie was gone. I couldn't believe it. Katie had been fine just yesterday. How could something like this happen? My mind was a whirlpool of confusion. Why? Why did you go ahead and bury her without telling me?" I asked, my voice trembling. The grief of losing Katie began to turn into anger. No, this had to be a cruel joke by Louie, or perhaps a nightmare I hadn't woken from. Katie passed away last night, and she's already been buried. How is that even possible? Louie's tone suddenly grew cold, and I could faintly hear him sigh on the other end. We had already filed the marriage certificate before the ceremony. Katie is part of our family now. I had no obligation to tell you in advance. Wait, that's right. I remember. There should be investigations and procedures after a death. There's no way she could have been buried so quickly. Hey, Louie, what are you hiding? Huh? If you had seen the state of that accident, you wouldn't be thinking about things so leisurely. My family has a relative who manages burials, and we handled it discreetly. That can't be. And besides, Katie's smartphone was destroyed in the accident. Even if you tried to call, it wouldn't go through. Those words pierced my heart. Destroyed. Was she really hurt that badly? Please at least allow me to attend her funeral. I desperately pleaded, but Louie coldly responded, "I'm going to be busy from here on, so I'll have to excuse myself." And with that, he hung up. I was left in shock. Cold fear and despair swirled inside me. Unable to sit still, I decided to take a taxi to the apartment where Katie and Louie had been living. I knew the address, though it was my first time visiting. When I arrived at the apartment, there was an eerie stillness around the door. I knocked. The sound echoed back at me, unanswered. No one was there. I hesitantly reached for the door, but it seemed to be locked. Just then, a neighbor, a young man who looked like a university student, poked his head out. He looked at me suspiciously. "The people who lived there. They moved out just last week," he said. "Katie." Tears streamed down my face as I murmured my daughter's name. As I stood in front of the apartment, lost in a daze, it began to rain. The sky was clear and blue, yet rain was falling. I used a rain as an excuse to stay there, unable to move. Inside, I couldn't accept that Katie was really gone. Sinking deeper into sadness, losing Katie made me feel truly, utterly alone. After that, I kept calling Louie over and over, trying to find out more about Katie's funeral. But Louie's voice grew more irritated with each call. "Stop calling me. Katie is gone. Whatever you say now, it's too late. Please, let me attend her funeral. I need a chance to say goodbye to her. I've told you before, this is none of your concern. She may have passed away, but she was part of our family. You need to respect our decisions." Despite my continuous calls, Louie eventually stopped answering and blocked my number. Feeling powerless and consumed by despair, I had no choice but to accept the reality that Katie was gone. Though I clung to the memories of her, the grief of losing Katie and the overwhelming loneliness that came with it slowly ate away at me. I lost my appetite, and my weight dropped drastically. But I didn't even have the energy to care about such things. And time passed, until 3 years went by. No matter how much time passed, a part of Katie still lingered in my heart. Life went on, but Katie's absence constantly cast a shadow over me. When I woke up in the morning, I thought of Katie's smile. Before going to sleep at night, I could still hear her voice in my ears. No matter how much time went by, Katie was never far from my thoughts. That day, on my way home from work, I was absent-mindedly thinking about Katie, as I often did. I wondered what her life would have been like if she were still alive. As I was lost in these thoughts, I suddenly noticed someone standing in front of my door. My heart skipped a beat. It was a woman, just standing there. Her frame was slight, and her long hair swayed gently in the breeze. I froze for a moment, unable to move, staring in disbelief. The woman noticed me and slowly turned around. What? No way. Standing before me was Katie, who I had been told died 3 years ago. She was as beautiful as she had been, as if time had stood still. I was overwhelmed with confusion and shock, rendered speechless. "Mom, I'm home. I'm sorry for being so late," Katie said, her voice trembling and tears in her eyes. Katie was alive, standing right in front of me. Was this a dream or a hallucination? Unable to believe what I was seeing, I stared at Katie's face. I stumbled backward, and in a shaky voice, I asked, "Katie." Tears streamed down my face, and through the whirlwind of emotions in my mind, I repeated her name over and over. Katie smiled softly and approached me. "Mom, I'm so sorry for everything. Is it really you, Katie? How are you still alive?" Though the words were coming out of my own mouth, I was completely lost, unsure of what was real anymore, but I continued to question Katie. "I'm sorry, Mom. So much has happened, and it took me too long to come back." As if suddenly remembering, I grabbed Katie's hand and hurriedly pulled her inside the house. My daughter, who I had been told died 3 years ago, had returned. The situation was clearly abnormal. I needed to hear the full story right away, so I sat Katie down at the table and faced her. Holding her hand tightly, I noticed how rough it was, like someone who had done a lot of hard work. I gently stroked her hand, which was dry and cracked. "Katie, what on earth happened? How did it come to this?" Katie looked at me with confusion in her eyes. She hesitated for a moment, then locked her gaze on mine. Taking a deep breath, she finally began to speak. "Mom, ever since I started living with Louis, right from the start, both him and his parents have." Katie's voice faltered, and she placed her hand on her chest, struggling to continue. I decided to wait, letting her speak at her own pace. After a few more deep breaths, Katie began speaking again, this time in a quieter but steady voice. "My position as their daughter-in-law was terrible. It was like I was less than human. They treated me like a slave." I was shocked, but at the same time, a part of me doubted her words. "Since the time you started living together, that was quite a while ago, wasn't it? I had met Louis when they were living together, and he didn't seem like someone who would treat her so cruelly. Louis, he's very kind. He's calm, intelligent. There were even times when I felt I didn't deserve him." To Katie, Louis initially seemed charming and reliable. With his handsome features and gentle smile, she had fallen for him. But as she grew closer to him, his true nature slowly began to reveal itself. But with me, he was always so controlling. He wanted to know everything I did. At first, I mistook it for care, and I was even flattered in some ways. But then it started to become painful, didn't it? Yes. He and his family would constantly say things like, "Ours is a prestigious family. You should be grateful to live with us and work for our sake." What is that supposed to mean? Katie's voice was shaking. Learning about the suffering she endured behind what had seemed like a happy life together crushed my heart. Katie continued, "They made me promise not to contact you after we got married. They told me I would never see you again. I was stunned, anger slowly building inside me. That's unacceptable. How could they do such a thing? Katie lowered her eyes. The day before the wedding, I came to visit you because I thought it would be my last chance. I snuck out without Louis knowing, but Katie's voice filled with regret. But Louis found out. I don't know how he knew I went to see you, but I looked at Katie with a questioning gaze, silently asking, why? Katie gave a troubled, self-deprecating smile and slumped her shoulders. Louis laughed and said, I put a GPS app on your smartphone. You didn't even notice, did you? And then, what happened? He took my smartphone away. They told you I had died in a car accident, and that the phone was destroyed, cutting off all communication with you. Tears welled up in Katie's eyes. Hearing this story, it felt like my heart was being torn apart. In retrospect, why hadn't I tried harder to visit Louis's family during those 3 years? Even though I didn't know their address, surely I could have found a way if I had tried. But instead, I had been paralyzed by shock, living in a haze of despair, doing nothing but wasting away. That's unforgivable. Were you fighting all alone in that horrible situation? I didn't have a choice. There was no one to help me. I was treated like nothing more than a servant for Louis's family. Katie's tone was distant, as if she were recounting someone else's story. I hugged her tightly, though she still looked as beautiful as she had 3 years ago. Beneath her clothes, her body was frail and thin. I had to protect Katie. The desire to shield her welled up inside me, overflowing from the depths of my heart. I'm sorry, Mom, Katie whispered. Why are you apologizing? Louis's the one who's at fault for everything. Katie began to speak softly, almost as if she were murmuring to herself. Louis hadn't been cruel from the beginning. He had been so kind. She wondered aloud where things had gone so wrong, and I gently stroked her head. You know, I realized that Louis had installed the GPS app on my phone. She confessed. What? But I thought it was just to make sure I wasn't cheating or something. I never imagined he'd get so angry just because I went to see you. Katie looked at me with innocent eyes, as if seeking validation, silently asking me whether her choices had been right or wrong, whether she deserved to be forgiven. It's okay, Katie. I'm here now. I'll protect you. No one will hurt you anymore. Katie buried her face in my chest and cried. In that moment, I resolved to protect Katie at all costs. The fear of losing her again, mixed with a burning determination to save my beloved daughter, flared up inside me. I would never forgive them. As I held her hand tightly, a question suddenly bubbled up from the depths of my mind. But why didn't you come to me? Why didn't you tell me how much you were suffering? Why didn't you ask for help? Katie lowered her eyes, a single tear sliding down her cheek. I didn't want to worry you, Mom. After being berated by Louis's family for so long, I started to believe I had no worth. She cast her gaze downward, realizing how much she had suffered, how she had carried this burden alone for so long. I wondered, had I been so unreliable as a parent? If only she had said help. Just that one word. But then, a year ago, when Louis's mom ordered me to clean the whole house, I found my confiscated smartphone in the storage room. Katie explained that she had charged the phone, praying as she waited for it to turn on. The phone wasn't broken, but the service had been canceled, leaving only a few functions still usable. The first thing I did was install the GPS app. I kept the phone recording all the time and carried it with me wherever I went, making sure no one would find it. As Katie finished recounting her story, her previously dark and somber expression brightened slightly, filled with hope. It seemed that finding her smartphone had been the turning point, a beacon of light that led her toward escaping her oppressive life. They were so sure that I was always at home. Louis and his family never even thought to check the GPS app anymore. Thanks to that, I was able to move freely without raising suspicion. That's amazing, Katie. So what did you do next? I gathered enough evidence of the verbal abuse so that I could file for divorce with Louis. At fault. I've been enduring it all this time, And today, when they were out of the house, I packed what I needed and ran here. Katie's face showed a sense of relief. I hugged her tightly, overflowing with gratitude from the bottom of my heart. You've been through so much. I should have confronted Louis and his family sooner. Then you wouldn't have had to suffer like this. As she buried her face in my chest, "Can I live with you again, Mom?" Katie murmured softly. The moment those words reached my ears, a warmth spread through my heart. "Of course, Katie. Let's live together again. From now on, we'll face everything together and enjoy life as we support each other." Katie looked up at me, a faint smile on her lips. That smile, like a glimmer of hope lost in her suffering, was radiant. Together, we would rebuild our lives. Though the path ahead would surely be difficult, I knew that, as long as we were together, we could overcome anything. Holding Katie tightly, I felt the flicker of hope for a brighter future. In the days that followed, however, I started to notice something about Katie's behavior that troubled me. Even in the middle of the night, she wouldn't stop fiddling with her smartphone, staying up until morning without sleeping. No matter how many times I told her, "You need to get some sleep," she would only give a half-hearted response and continue to gaze out the window instead of resting. This felt off. Feeling concerned, I suggested that we visit a nearby psychiatrist, but she vehemently refused. Reluctantly, I drove her to a mental health clinic farther away, one that had a beautiful exterior, hoping she would feel more comfortable there. The clinic was on the 3rd floor of a building, and the elevator was small and stifling. The doctor, a slightly overweight man with a kind expression, listened patiently to Katie's story. Later, I was called into a separate room, where the doctor told me, "She's depressed," in the same casual tone someone might use to say, "It's just a cold." They prescribed 2 types of medication, one to calm her emotions, and another to help her sleep. Gently pulling Katie close, I realized just how deep her emotional wounds were. After that, we visited a law office together to discuss her divorce. With Katie's medical diagnosis and the audio recordings she had collected, the evidence was deemed sufficient, and we planned to file for compensation from Louis in divorce court. Additionally, given the severity of the verbal abuse she had endured from her in-laws, we would also seek damages from them. Now it was only a matter of taking it to court. Katie had made up her mind about something. It wasn't enough to simply talk to Louis about the divorce. She needed him to understand the pain he had put her through. Today was the day. I sat next to Katie in a quiet cafe, ready to support her. Louis arrived a little late, and Katie glanced at me nervously. I smiled and reassured her, "It's okay. You've got this." Louis looked different from the last time I'd seen him, tired and worn. He took a seat, ordered an iced coffee, and without even acknowledging me, stared directly at Katie in silence. "Louis, we need to talk. You left the house without a word. Do you know how worried I've been? Even Mom's been frantic." His gaze was a mix of confusion and irritation. When the iced coffee arrived, he stabbed the straw into it and took a single sip. "Your verbal abuse and cruelty. I can't take it anymore, Louis." "What nonsense are you talking about? Hurry up and come home to do the housework." "That's why I bothered to show up. I was diagnosed with depression, Louis. Because of the way you treated me, I've been suffering." For a brief moment, Louis was silent, but then a cold smile crept across his face. For the first time, he acknowledged my presence with a glance, smirking as he said, "Hey, who put you up to this?" Then his tone shifted back to indifference. "Doesn't matter. You're my wife, and you'll do as I say. I don't have to listen to you anymore." Katie's voice trembled with tears, but her words were firm and resolute. "I want a divorce. I want my freedom back." With that, Katie reached into her pocket and pulled out her smartphone, playing the audio recordings she had gathered. Louis' past verbal assaults, along with the vicious remarks from his parents, filled the cafe. Katie didn't care about the volume. She didn't care if people stared. Let everyone hear it. Let them all know the kind of man Louis really was. "You're useless, can't do anything right. You should be grateful you even have a place in this house. Louis's own voice echoed back to him, growing louder as it reached his ears. He looked visibly shaken, his face turning pale. Turn the volume down. You're disturbing everyone. This is the reality I've been living with, Louis, Katie said calmly. Now you understand how much you've tormented me, don't you? Louis was speechless, a look of fear creeping across his face. To have his own cruel words played back to him like this, how must it feel? He took several more sips of his iced coffee, wiping the sweat from his brow, clearly rattled. Aren't you embarrassed, dragging our family's name through the mud like this? I'm not afraid of your words anymore. I'm choosing to leave you and reclaim my life. Her voice was strong and unwavering. Louis, clearly shocked by Katie's sudden assertiveness, stared in disbelief. It was likely that Katie had never once stood up to him like this before. As I watched her muster every ounce of courage to speak her truth, I applauded her in my heart. What you did to her is unforgivable. For her to live a happy life from now on, she needs to be free from you. I turned to Louis and spoke firmly. He was visibly shaken by my words, covering his face with his hands. Wait. Just wait. Divorce, that's impossible. As the eldest son, what will my family say? I can't be the one to break tradition. No, Louis. What's impossible is for you to continue. Louis was at a loss for words, clearly shaken. His face went pale, his eyes flickering with fear. Katie has proof, evidence of how much you've hurt her. We'll reveal everything in court. The mention of court made Louis's face flush red with anger. He stood up suddenly, slamming the table as he loomed over Katie and me. Gone was the composed, handsome man he liked to portray. Instead, his face was twisted in rage, revealing the real him beneath the surface. Are you both out of your minds? I told you from the start we come from a prestigious family. Do you even understand what it means to live in my house? You, Katie, a penniless girl who rushed into marriage just for my wealth. His voice was tinged with uncertainty, even as he spat those words. I found myself watching him from a distance, almost detached, wondering, why was he so angry? Why couldn't he value Katie? Why, if he feared this outcome so much, had he continued to torment her for so long? The consequences of your actions will come back to you, I said, maintaining my resolute stance. Katie rose from her chair, taking a step forward to confront Louis's trembling anger. The suffering you caused me, now it's your turn to face it. Louis, shaken by her words, took a step back. We explained that Katie had consulted with a lawyer. With the evidence of the verbal abuse recorded, Louis would be taken to court, and financial compensation would be demanded. Are you really going to go through with this? Do you have any idea who my family is? We have prominent figures, celebrities even, in our lineage. If this scandal gets out, that has nothing to do with me, Katie retorted sharply, her voice filled with newfound strength. She had made her decision. No more running away. She was going to take back her life. Weeks passed, though Louis initially resisted. When the lawyer pushed forward with the court case, he quickly agreed to the divorce and to paying compensation. When Katie heard the news, a sense of relief began to wash over her, as if the years of torment were finally starting to fade. But healing was not so simple. Her emotional scars were deep. Though she took her medication regularly, there were still many nights she couldn't sleep. Sometimes, without saying a word, she would break down in tears. I believed those tears were cleansing the 3 painful years she had endured. So I sat quietly by her side, offering no words, only presence. Katie wasn't yet ready to return to work, but slowly, she began to reconnect with old friends, her spirit starting to brighten once more. Her smile, which had been lost for so long, began to shine again. Seeing that transformation filled me with joy. Now, Katie was living with me, helping with household chores. On weekends, we would go out together, sometimes visiting the zoo. I hadn't been able to spend time with her when she was young because work kept me so busy. I never imagined that we'd find ourselves at the zoo together like this now, with her all grown up. When we arrived at the zoo, Katie's eyes lit up with childlike excitement. "Look, Mom, that panda is so cute." Seeing her innocence and joy brought a smile to my face. It made me think how long had it been since I last visited a zoo. We spent the day together, moving from one animal exhibit to the next, enjoying the simple pleasures of being in each other's company. "Hey, Mom, did you hear? Louis and his family are constantly fighting. They've used up all their savings," Katie said as we casually strolled past the quiet animals in their enclosures. Katie paused suddenly as we neared the far end of the zoo. There, in a small isolated cage, sat a little fox. "That's what they deserve. They'll never understand the pain you went through," I responded, laughing softly, as if a weight had been lifted from my heart. Katie's eyes remained fixed on the fox, motionless and forlorn. "Yeah, I can't believe I wasted all that time suffering for people like them. It's time I let it go." "That's the right choice. Doesn't this fox look kind of lonely?" Katie's voice was soft, filled with empathy. The little creature lay quietly, its head lowered to the ground as if it were too tired to move. As I watched the fox, I found myself reflecting on the past, those feelings of isolation, the fear of being misunderstood. I thought about the days when her freedom had been stolen from her. Somehow I couldn't help but see her former self in the caged fox. Just then, rain began to fall unexpectedly. The sky was still clear, a passing sun shower, perhaps. It seemed like the kind of rain that would stop in just a few minutes. We took shelter under a nearby roof, watching the sky as we waited. The scene felt eerily familiar, just like that day, the day I learned Katie had passed away. That feeling of despair, that unbearable grief beneath a sky just like this. But this time, there was something different. A rainbow stretched across the blue sky, bright and hopeful. We stood together in silence, watching the rain quietly pass. Families and couples around us did the same, waiting under the shelters until the rain subsided. "Life is so hard, isn't it?" Katie murmured, her gaze fixed on the rainbow. "Yes, it is," I whispered in reply. "But the pain is over now. Let's be happy from here on out." "Okay." Katie looked at me with a soft, knowing expression before turning her attention back to the fox in the cage. The fox, which had seemed on the verge of sleep just moments ago, now looked directly at Katie, as if sensing something. It lowered its head to the ground again, but this time with a sort of quiet peace. From that moment, Katie and I continued to live our days together, supporting each other, laughing, and sharing our worries. We were building a new bond, stronger than ever. As we moved forward in life, hand in hand, I knew there would be challenges and hardships, but together, we could face anything. Together, we could overcome. No, not just could, we would. Absolutely.
"I can't believe I'm the only one without food. That's just cruel, mother-in-law." As the eldest son's wife yells, she covers her face with both hands, her eyes brimming with tears. Just as her words imply, all that's in front of her is an empty glass and a solitary fork. The relatives seem to finally catch on to the situation and begin to jeer one after another. Whoa! Could this be Emily's debut of tormenting her daughter-in-law? "I'm on Team Naomi. Ghost mother-in-law, stop the torment. Begone, evil spirit." Dear daughter-in-law, don't cry. It's a mix of 10% concern and 90% just messing around. I shrug my shoulders at the relatives who are starting to get tipsy from the drinks. For them, the discord between me and the eldest son's wife might just be another piece of entertainment at the New Year's celebration. In that case, as the host, I need to entertain our guests even more. Of course, this includes the very person who caused this situation, the eldest son's wife. All right. I'll go get Naomi's portion too, so just wait a moment." With resolution, I clutch a tray to my chest and head back to the kitchen. My name is Emily Johnson, 62 years old. After losing my beloved husband 2 years ago and my eldest son moving out after getting married a year ago, I've been living alone in this house. I can't say I don't feel lonely, but as someone who enjoys her own company, living alone isn't particularly hard for me. That's why I've been politely declining every time my eldest son invites me to live with him. I didn't want to intrude on his newlywed life and, fortunately, I have a lot of relatives living nearby, so I haven't been lonely. However, I would later come to understand the real meaning behind my son's persistent invitations to live together. It was an SOS from my eldest son.
Mom, please come help me right away.
It was one night, a few months after my eldest son got married. My eldest son suddenly called me. It was dinner time, and I was just about to eat my meal. What's the matter? Why are you calling at this time?
I'll explain later. For now, it's an emergency. I hate to impose, but can you come to my house right away?
Getting a sudden call without any explanation left me briefly perplexed. My eldest son's house was located in the neighboring county. It wasn't an impossible distance to cover right now, but it wasn't exactly around the corner either. Still, something in my eldest son's demeanor told me this was no ordinary matter, so I decided to put my dinner on hold and head to his house. What I found there was something I'll probably never forget. Part of the kitchen in their newly built house had been blackened by soot. The smell of burning and heat filled the air, and remnants of foam from a fire extinguisher were still scattered here and there. And right next to that kitchen, my daughter-in-law was crying inconsolably.
What on earth happened here?
Well, we had a bit of a fire. Naomi was so upset, I had to call you. I hate to ask, but could you help us clean up? According to my son, my daughter-in-law was cooking dinner when suddenly a pillar of fire shot up from the pan. I managed to put out the fire in the pan with a wet rag, but sparks flew and ignited the surroundings. I used the fire extinguisher to take care of the rest, but it made a mess of the kitchen. While he was telling me this, I noticed that he was holding an ice pack to his arm. It seems he had burned himself while putting out the fire. I decided to postpone cleaning the kitchen and started tending to my son's burn. Luckily, the burn wasn't severe, but this could have been a major disaster. Perhaps it's a blessing that this was the extent of the damage.
Is Naomi all right? Did she get burned or anything?
I'm fine. She didn't seem to have any burns as far as I could see. But Naomi was the one cooking, and it seemed strange that she was unharmed given the fierceness of the fire. When I asked about this, I found out the cause of the fire. Naomi, it seems, was scared of oil splattering when she was frying frozen croquettes. After some hesitation, she tossed a few croquettes from the edge of the kitchen into the pan. This caused the oil to splatter, and when the heated oil reached its limit, it ignited the gas stove, causing a pillar of fire. I was so scared. I'm afraid of frying stuff. My daughter-in-law continued sobbing. Even though she was shaken, it would have been nice if she could at least help with her husband's first aid. As I cleaned the kitchen, I let out a small sigh. In the end, cleaning the kitchen took about 3 hours. I ended up catching the last train home, and throughout that time, my daughter-in-law did nothing to help with the cleaning. She just kept complaining about how my favorite pot and I had a hard time choosing the kitchen wallpaper. Could it be that my daughter-in-law is bad at cooking? That suspicion turned into certainty a few months later, on my birthday. At my age, my own birthday isn't exactly a special day. It's more of a moment to reflect on getting another year older. Without my husband, I didn't feel any desire to be celebrated, so I planned to spend the day leisurely enjoying my hobby of cooking. But, unexpectedly, I received another invitation from my son and his wife. They wanted to treat me to dinner to celebrate my birthday and to apologize for the previous incident. With that in mind, I decided to visit my son's house once again. But there, I found myself embroiled in another unforgettable incident.
What dish is this supposed to be?
I looked at the object piled high on the plate before me, hesitating before I asked. If I had to describe it as is, I would say it resembles a lump of coal that's on fire. Anyone would think the same if they saw the small, black lump sitting atop a heap of carelessly torn raw cabbage.
Eh? Don't you recognize it? It's fried chicken. Christmas is coming up, so I thought it would be a surprise. Believe it or not, I've been working hard to conquer my fear of deep frying.
My eldest son's wife puffed out her chest as if to say, "Impressive, right?" Upon hearing this, I sent a quick glance towards the kitchen. Despite the lingering signs of a fire incident, it seemed that a major catastrophe like last time was avoided. If my eldest son's wife, who was once terrified of frying, had managed to overcome her fears, then surely it was something worthy of praise. But then,
Fried chicken.
I gazed down once again at the black lump before me. Upon closer examination, I could see spots that had turned a brownish hue from being fried. Perhaps she'd been overly cautious due to her fear of frying, causing it to char. Even if it was burned, it must still taste good, right? Despite my attempts at self-reassurance, it was a tough sell. But refusing to eat was not an option. Looking at my eldest son, who was nervously hanging his head beside his excited wife, I braced myself to take a bite. The true value of a dish is not in its appearance. After all, my daughter-in-law had gone to the trouble of preparing this for me. I couldn't just dismiss her effort. So, I mustered the courage to bite into the lump. Ignoring the burnt smell, I chewed. The outer shell, which felt like charcoal, made a crunching noise and crumbled, revealing the rubbery texture of the meat underneath, filling my mouth. It was a taste unlike any I've experienced before. What had she used to marinate it? It was incredibly sweet. And the burnt parts were bitter. Honestly, I wanted to spit it out right away. Despite the unpleasant taste, I somehow managed to swallow it with the help of some water and mustered up a smile. Oh, it's tasty. Probably the hardest I've ever worked to say anything in my life. My efforts seemed to pay off as my daughter-in-law beamed with joy. It's a common story on daytime TV, a mother-in-law criticizing her daughter-in-law's cooking leading to family discord. A single offhand comment from the mother-in-law can place the son in the middle of the dispute, which could lead to the breakdown of the marriage. But it seems like I've managed to dodge that bullet. Just as I let out a sigh of relief, my daughter-in-law mercilessly placed the next dish before me. She described it as a seafood soup, but seeing the raw shrimp in the overflowing green liquid, I felt a bit dizzy. Now, I find myself in the hospital, getting in for drip. My memory is a bit fuzzy for the 2 to 3 days after the dinner party, but it seems I was found collapsed at home due to severe abdominal pain and dehydration. A relative who happened to visit found me and took me to the hospital. The doctor told me it was food poisoning caused by a bacterium called Campylobacter. When asked if I'd eaten any undercooked chicken, everything fell into place. Fried chicken. Remembering that hellish texture and flavor, a shiver ran down my spine. And I became convinced. My eldest son's wife's cooking is beyond just bad. My son is in danger. Something must be done, and soon. While I was recovering, I got in touch with my son and found out he was in the hospital with food poisoning. Both husband and wife were bedridden, or so I thought. It turned out Naomi hadn't eaten any of the food she had cooked, and she was perfectly fine.
Naomi doesn't eat her own cooking?
I asked. I'm not sure about during the day, but she's on some sort of diet for breakfast and dinner. Always eating salads and smoothies. That's why she probably doesn't realize how disastrous her cooking is. My son explained.
But she must at least taste it, right?
I argued. I don't know if she doesn't taste it or if she just can't tell it's bad. Either way, I'm at a loss. He replied.
So you've been eating that food all this time? It's okay to have different tastes, but it's definitely bad for your health. Why not excuse yourself from it from now on?
I suggested. While giving this advice, I had a change of heart. It might be difficult. When she caused the small fire, Naomi never apologized to the end and only complained. Even if we pointed out her poor cooking skills, she might not admit her faults. Worse, she might become agitated. My son seemed to understand this as well, and laughed as if he had given up. At first, I couldn't stand the bad food and always wanted to live with you. But even if we live together now, Naomi has high pride and won't relinquish the kitchen. She even gets furious when I try to cook. I was careless and got food poisoning this time, but recently I've learned to defend myself enough to avoid being hospitalized. Don't worry, he assured me.
Really?
I said. Even so, there's no way it's healthy for him to keep eating food that doesn't suit his palate. As a small aid, I asked my son to bring Naomi to our home for the New Year's celebration. Many relatives would come, and it wouldn't be a problem if the number of people increased by 2. I would cook a feast with my skills. My son was happy to accept the offer, looking forward to my home-cooked meals. I'm glad. I could potentially teach Naomi some cooking under the pretense of giving her recipes for any dishes she liked. But reality took an unexpected turn. After celebrating the new year with my son and his wife who came over on New Year's Eve, I woke up in the morning to find the dishes I had prepared over several days completely changed. When I went to the kitchen and saw the catastrophe, everything went dark before my eyes.
Good morning, Mom. Thank you for the delicious dinner last night. As a thank you, I helped with the New Year's celebration dishes you had prepared.
Naomi said with a laugh.
Helped? You mean this? This isn't a prank.
I exclaimed.
No way, Mom. I would never prank you. I just made a few tweaks. Party food can be boring if it's always the same, right? I thought a change like this might be good.
Naomi responded, grinning innocently. I was speechless in front of her smile. But I felt like something was falling apart under me. All the dishes I had spent days preparing for today. I had procured only the freshest of ingredients. In honor of the new year, I had even splurged on some usually pricey items. Now, they were just glorified garbage. Ignoring my eldest daughter-in-law's gleeful explanations, I dug around hoping to find something, anything that was salvageable. In the end, everything I had prepared was ruined. The only things unscathed were pre-packaged foods, beverages, and a few ingredients. On top of that, there simply wasn't enough time to start all over.
Kai, I hate to ask this, but can you head to any open supermarket right now and grab anything that we could serve at the table?
It's New Year's Day. Chances of finding any party food left on shelves, those that usually require pre-ordering, would be slim. Even so, I just needed something, anything that could serve as a side dish. Kai, my eldest son, understanding my predicament, immediately agreed to run the errands. In the end, I managed to plate up a few dishes using the store-bought deli items and the leftover ingredients we had, successfully saving face, at least in appearances. Of course, during all this, I didn't let my daughter-in-law anywhere near the kitchen. Compared to the feast I had planned, it was pitiful, but I had no other choice. As long as we could get through today, that's all that mattered. Just as I thought that, my invited relatives started to arrive one after the other.
Happy New Year! Thanks again for the invite. I've been looking forward to Emily's cooking all year.
Long time no see, Kai and Naomi. How have you been? The relatives greeted each other and took their seats at the table. We began with communion wine for the toast, but soon everyone switched to their preferred beers and started eating while enjoying their conversations. They were so engrossed in their chats that no one seemed to notice the unusual dishes in front of them. My eldest daughter-in-law, who was kicked out of the kitchen early, was sulking at the table, still not quite comprehending the situation. Then she noticed that there was no plate of deli food in front of her. She looked up at me.
Mother-in-law, my portion is...
There's no portion for you. While poking at the plate in front of me, I replied curtly. The relatives, sensing the tense atmosphere, stopped their chatters. Taking advantage of the sudden attention, my daughter-in-law dramatically filled her eyes with tears and covered her face with her hands.
It's cruel not to serve me food while everyone else has theirs. This is too much, mother-in-law.
As her words suggested, in front of my daughter-in-law was only an empty glass and a lone fork. The relatives seemed to finally catch on to the situation, beginning to jeer one after another.
Oh. Is this Emily's debut as the wicked mother-in-law? All right. I'm rooting for Naomi. Mother-in-law from hell, stop your bullying. Out with the evil spirits.
Stay strong, bride. It seemed a 10% worry and 90% mischief mix. As I shrugged at the relatives, already tipsy from the booze, I realized for them, the friction between me and the eldest son's wife was nothing more than New Year's entertainment. As the host, I had to entertain the guests further, even the main instigator of this situation. The eldest son's wife was no exception. Can't be helped.
I'll bring Naomi's share too, so just wait a bit.
Resolute, I hugged the tray to my chest and returned to the kitchen. Before long, I returned to the living room with an oval platter in hand. It was a seafood platter. The relatives loved seafood. So this platter was something I had reserved a month in advance for this very day. Both the relatives and the eldest son's wife probably thought that another dish was being brought out for each of them. They were surprised by the sudden appearance of a large dish, but of course, I meant the part arranged by the eldest son's wife. But there was no way they could understand that. The eldest son's wife, in particular, looked pleased, probably thinking it was finally time to showcase the dish she had arranged.
Oh. We've been waiting. What's this, seafood as well? I was thinking there was surprisingly little variety this year.
Looks delicious, let's dig in. As soon as I set it on the table, the relatives' forks extended towards it. But, predictably, as soon as they put the seafood in their mouths, screams echoed from everywhere.
Ack! What on earth is this? Sweet seafood!
Relatives began visibly grimacing and reaching for water. That was hardly surprising. The seafood platter was heavily dressed in honey. Conceivably, a seasoned chef might successfully combine seafood and honey, but the creative touch was unfortunately added by the eldest son's wife. There was undoubtedly some other unfathomable ingredient mixed in. Naomi tweaked the recipe for you all. Right?
Yes. I got the idea from a maple syrup salmon poke bowl.
But it wasn't just honey. The oysters were topped with caramel sauce, and the crab was sprinkled with tiny golden pieces of paper. Upon closer inspection, they were actually pieces of origami.
It's for the New Year's celebration. Don't you often see it in full-course meals?
Well, those usually come with edible gold leaf. Not paper that can't be eaten. Seems like the relatives agreed. All of them put down their forks with strained expressions. They must have expected the dish to be met with high praise. The relatives awkwardly explained.
Naomi, you do have a sweet tooth. We, on the other hand, prefer spicy food. Naomi, you do have a sweet tooth. We, on the other hand, prefer spicy food.
While the eldest son's wife dropped her shoulders in disappointment. Next, I served the homemade roast beef. It was one of my husband's favorites and a long-standing dish in our family. However, even when I placed the large pot of it on the table, no one reached out with their forks. It made sense. No one could explain why the roast beef was stewing in a pot. Except for the eldest son's wife, of course.
I found this big chunk of meat, so I decided to stew it in red wine. Doesn't it look tasty? Please, help yourselves.
So that was it. The unnaturally dark color was from the red wine. However, it was clear from the smell that the alcohol hadn't been cooked off, and the color was far from being produced by red wine alone. At least, it looked like it was mixed with powdered chili or bean paste. Or it might have been colored with paint. It wouldn't be out of character for the eldest son's wife. And it wasn't funny.
You all mentioned earlier that you like spicy food, right? This should pair well with your drinks. Go on, go on.
Having just rejected her previous dish, the relatives likely felt they couldn't escape this time. They hesitantly picked out the once roast beef from the pot and took a bite. Then, screams echoed again. From their repeated calls for water, it seemed it was too spicy this time.
This is ridiculous. What kind of a sick joke is this? This isn't fit for human consumption. Even dog food is better than this.
Finally, it seemed they had reached their limit. One after another, harsh words were hurled at the eldest son's wife. Upon witnessing the relatives' reactions, the eldest son's wife finally understood the harsh criticism her creative dish received, and she burst into tears.
You're all so cruel. I worked so hard on this. Turning mom's cooking into garbage and then complaining about it, unbelievable.
The eldest son glared at his wife in disgust. This roast beef was a dish that the eldest son often enjoyed, making his anger even more potent.
You turned it into garbage. So this was originally Emily's cooking?
That's correct. Everything on that plate is store-bought.
Naomi turned all the chicken noodle soup and party foods I prepared in advance into waste, so I had no choice but to buy these. Waste. Such a term.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I should have said poison, considering what was found next to the pot.
I held up an empty spice bottle for everyone to see. The label read nutmeg. A common spice, typically used in meat dishes. As of last night, this bottle was unopened, meaning that Naomi must have dumped the entire bottle into the pot.
Do you know? Nutmeg is a wonderful spice that can make meat dishes delicious in small amounts, but it can actually be poisonous. There have been instances of people dying from overdosing. The lethal dose is only 10 g. The most common poison, isn't it? No way! By the way, this bottle contains 15 g. Considering all of it was dumped into the pot, if you finished eating, it's certainly enough to invite death. Stop joking! Are you trying to send us to the hospital?
Accusations turned into shouts of anger as the reality of nearly being served poison on top of food worse than dog food set in. Overwhelmed, Naomi began crying and pleading.
But I didn't know. Nutmeg goes with meat, right? I just wanted to make it tastier. It's not my fault. Yeah, you said the same thing before. You didn't know about Campylobacter. Nobody taught you. Yeah, that's right. You never learned the basics of cooking from anyone, didn't listen to any advice, didn't even properly read a cookbook. You just cook on a whim, not even tasting your own food. That's why you end up making garbage.
At her husband's harsh words, Naomi stopped crying. She probably thought her husband would side with her. But he mercilessly called the dish garbage and turned to the relatives. He seemed still angry that the relatives had deemed me a demon mother-in-law without knowing the full story.
Now you understand why my mother didn't serve Naomi food. She ruined my mother's cooking. And she's not even remorseful about it. There's no need to prepare a decent meal for someone like that. Isn't that right? If you still side with Naomi, I will cut ties with you all here and now.
Faced with the eldest son's reasonable argument, the relatives bowed their heads in silence. As if to drive the point home, when I asked, "Would you like seconds?" and moved the meat closer, the relatives screamed, backed away, and some even fell from their chairs. As I remained silent, they eventually began to mutter apologies in dry voices. After that, the remorseful relatives ate only the original store-bought dishes, and each of them went home, each with words of apology. The eldest son's wife tried to sneak away amidst the chaos, but my son and I didn't miss it. We made sure she sat down and took responsibility for the mess she'd created. And of course, that meant making sure she ate her own creation. As a result, she's now in the hospital. She could only manage a few bites of any of the dishes. While it was a bit unsatisfying from my perspective, I think it was a good opportunity for her to learn just how outrageous her cooking was. Afterwards, I was left with the problem of dealing with the leftovers. After some thought, I decided to take them with me when I visited my eldest son's wife in the hospital. I figured if I showed them to her doctor, they'd understand the cause of her illness. However, I had the good fortune to bump into her parents who were also visiting. As things naturally played out, I ended up handing the leftovers to them. As a result, upon discharge, my eldest son's wife was immediately sent back to live with her parents. Her parents apologized profusely, saying things like, "We had no idea she was feeding Kai such horrible things, and we don't need any money for medical expenses. If you want to divorce, we're okay with that." So, my son and I, who had been harboring resentment all this while, finally felt like we could let it go. And as for our relatives, they lavished us with expensive meats, fine liquors, and fresh fish as an apology. When I said it was too much for me alone to eat, they suggested we start the New Year celebration anew, which made my son and I burst out laughing.
"You know, it's just not the New Year without Emily's cooking,"
they said. Those words warmed my heart. After all, the purpose of cooking is to bring joy to others. So, I will continue to hone my skills and make those who look forward to my cooking smile.